Hello, folks. Welcome back to another edition of SHU Outdoors. My name is Mick. I'm your host. And today we're going to do a deep dive on race relations in prison and how, in my opinion, it fosters extremism in every way imaginable. I did 10 years in the federal prison system. And before that, I did 14 years in the New York State prison system. Now, the federal prison system, I would say, is in large part based on kind of the California prison system, or the way it used to be anyway, but in a much more extreme form. When I was doing the 14 years in New York State, I'm not going to say there wasn't an element of racial segregation, but not on the part of the administration. People who feel comfortable hanging out with one another always kind of hang out with one another, but it was always much more of a system. New York State prison system, in my experience, after doing 14 years in mediums and maximum security facilities, Sing Sing, Attica, Auburn, Elmira. I've been around pretty extensively. Sullivan, I was with the Son of Sam. I was also with Mad Dog Joe Sullivan. I've been around a lot of, quote unquote heavy hitters or infamous people in the New York State prison system. But the vibe in that system has always been, at least in my experience, is us against the system, against the police, against oppression. And I carried that mentality with me over into the federal prison system, but I was kind of met with a rude surprise because that wasn't necessarily the vibe that's predominant in the federal prison system. The vibe is racial segregation in the most extreme form, and not so much prisoners against the system, even though there's an element of that exists in the federal prison system. But at the United States penitentiary system, it's really much more about racial politics, racial segregation, and I can't think of really any point in that 10-year period that I did in the federal prison system where I had any significant issues with black or brown prisoners. All the issues that I had or I experienced was with other white prisoners trying to dictate to me how I should or should not do things. And obviously, you have to conform to a certain degree if you want to make it through it in one piece. But I was always very resentful of that because, I don't have an identity crisis. And just because I'm talking to a black guy it doesn't mean that I don't understand who I am and know who I am. And that was kind of a problem in the federal prison system. But today we're going to do a reaction on this channel, 30 to Life. Very intelligent person, a very intelligent guy. And I think he kind of breaks down the California prison system. So if you kind of listen to what he says, I found it to be relatively accurate. And then inject a whole bunch of steroids in it, you'll get the federal prison system, at least at the United States penitentiary level. The federal prison system is not called the Federal Department of Corrections. It's called the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And you got camps, FCIs, which are kind of broke up in between low security, and medium security. Even though they're both FCIs, there's that distinction. One has a little less security than the other one. And then you got something called United States penitentiaries. There is no word. Corrections isn't a part of any of that whole sentence. The federal Federal Bureau of Prisons or the United States Penitentiary. There's no corrections in any of those two sentences. Where in an FCI, you do have the word correction. So, that's kind of like a indicator of what you're getting yourself into if you ever find yourself in a position like that in the United States Penitentiary. But let's go ahead and get into what this brother's got to say, and we'll take it from there.
What's up, lifers? Welcome back to 30 to Life. So we're going to talk about racism, racial division in the prison system. Racial division is something that's been used by the government, by the system forever to divide and conquer people, to make people focus on one another because they know that we give a fuck about stupid shit like skin color or neighborhoods and things like that. So in the prison system, especially in the California prison system, in order to control all these inmates that are locked up in prison, you got to mentally control them. So basically, they segregate you by race or gangs. And that way we just continue to focus on one another and not focus on what really is happening to us. We're getting fucked. All of us are getting fucked by the same system. So the racial division in prison, that's why it's put there, to make sure that we stay divided and that there's no unity amongst the inmates. So what do I think about it? I think it's fucking poison, honestly. When I went in there, from my own experience myself, I never really became racial towards anybody. But I did feel, a type of way, towards everyone, because when it came down to it, in my car, the other car, I rode with Islanders and Asians. So if you weren't Islander or Asian and, you were a threat to us, then I would just, look at you as an enemy no matter what. So it didn't matter to me what skin color you were or what gang you're from or what neighborhood you're from, because, within our car, we're different skin colors, we're different, actually different races. And, a lot of us are from different gangs. So that stuff didn't matter to us, man. Our unity amongst one another, as one, that's what matters. But, I met this brother from Vallejo one time when I was in county jail, and it was before I went to prison. And he had told me, he said, Ron, man, I grew up, with Mexicans and everything and white folks and all that, and just never had a problem with anybody in another race or their color of their skin or whatnot. So, this brother was telling me, being from Vallejo and all, he was just like basically saying, my best friend was Mexican, and I spent the night over at his house. He spent the night over at my house. We ate each other's food, whatever. He said, man, when I went to prison, my whole thought process on how I felt about Mexican people, he's like, Ron, I hate Mexican people. I hate them. You know what I'm saying? And that's what prison does to you, he said. Prison will make you racist, especially California.
I think I would have to agree with him with some essential notes. Like in the federal prison system, whatever your race is, black, white, brown, other, the Islanders would be considered an other, because they're not really black, white, or brown. They're kind of a mix of all the above, kind of. In federal prison, if you're white, the chances of you being assaulted or stabbed by another race is relatively low. If you're a man and you know how to conduct yourself, and you're a gentleman and a straight dealer, anything could theoretically happen. But in my experience and what I personally witnessed and what I dealt with, the chances of you being stabbed by a black or brown person or another, the Islanders, is relatively low. I would say 9 times out of 10, if you're white and you get assaulted or stabbed, it's going to be by another white guy. oftentimes they won't even know why they're stabbing you. They got the order to do it from some shot caller or whoever spun a case on you or plotted and schemed against you who doesn't want you around. Even with that in mind, the way the federal prison system operates, and especially at the penitentiary level, that's what I'm speaking on and concentrating on. I did go to a low for a violation, but other than that, I did 9+ years on a 10-year sentence, all at United States penitentiaries. It's extremely segregated. And what I mean by that? Well, we all live in the same housing block, black, brown, black, others, but the prison itself segregates us, and we all the races, not just white. They demand it, okay? Some of the notable differences between the federal prison system and the state prison system. If you get 10 years in the feds, that's considered a skid bid. Now, I know that sounds kind of crazy to say something like that, but the feds routinely hand out football numbers. So it's not uncommon to be in a federal prison and come across somebody doing 20 years, 30 years, 25 years, 22 years for a conspiracy where no crime was actually even committed. They just talked about maybe committing a crime, and they had the means and they had the opportunity, and some federal prosecutor had decided to indict them, and the federal judge had no problem giving them 20 years. Now, unless you qualify low-level drug dealers or drug dealers, not just low-level, but there's a handful of crimes where you can take programs and earn extra good time and extra halfway house. But I'd say 65% of the federal prison population doesn't qualify for any of those programs. So, think about it. If you're in a highly racial environment, and let's say you're white, so, unless you're already established in some other gang that is primarily not white, you're going to be forced to run with your race, whether if you like it or not. That's just the way it is. And if you go against that, you will be stabbed brutally by other white dudes, unless you are in an established organization that is primarily black or Hispanic, and you were a part of that on the street, and the blacks or Hispanics or the others accept you as one of theirs. Otherwise, you will be forced to run with the white race because you're white. And it's not just about what you want to do, it's about what other people are going to allow you to do in that environment. And if you don't go along with these racial politics, you don't even have to second guess it. You're going to be assaulted. And once that happens, you're kind of what they consider out bad. Okay, so you're going to go to the hole, or you're going to check into protective custody, and that's going to follow you every jail you go to. All right? And you might have to go to 3 or 4 jails getting beat off the yard and getting assaulted before you end up in what is called a special needs yard. And that's just the way it's going to play out. So you're in a situation where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So California, I know, is segregated along racial lines also, but I've talked to it. There's a lot of people from California in the federal prison system. So I've talked to them. I'm pretty aware of the system, even though I've never been in the California prison system. I have a pretty good understanding of exactly how that system works. So if you take that system and you mix in 49 other states and several U.S. territories, and you inject a big dose of racial steroids into it, you end up with the federal penitentiary system. Murder's commonplace. Assaults is every day. Everybody's packing shanks. And you have to do 85% of 40 years. So there is no reason to behave or even care if the sun rises in the morning. I had 10 years. That was considered a skid bid. That's still a decade. Let's not minimize it. But when you're around people doing 40 years, 50 years, life without parole, 28 years, 10 years is a very manageable sentence. Now, the question is, are you going to get from start at point A and get to point Z, or you get out in one piece? That's the question. And that's really what this channel is all about. At the core of it is kind of helping people understand what not to do if you find yourself in a horrible situation like that. Hopefully you never find yourself in a situation like that. But the federal prison system is one of the worst prison systems probably in the country, okay? Because it is extremely violent. Death is around every corner. And if you are assaulted, it's probably not going to be by another race. It's going to be by your race, because either you did something they didn't like, or they just don't like you and they imagine that you did something they don't like. So, and coming from the New York State prison system, where it was really us against the system, and going into a place where it's not just whites against blacks or whites against browns or others, even though there's an element of that, it's more white against white. If you don't conform exactly to whatever is the white line is, there will be severe consequences. And that's just the way it's going down. And you'll have to comply to a degree if you want to make it out one piece.
On your prisons. So, I didn't know it was like that until I went to prison. So when I went to prison, I started seeing what was going on as far as blacks, Mexicans, whites, and things like that. I couldn't believe how much racial tension there was, in prison. Even my co-defendants, my co-defendants were white. I know you guys got to watch that, but if you haven't got to watch my video on how I went to prison and things like that, I'll put it right here. You guys can go check it out. But yeah, my co-defendants were white, and they didn't grow up like that. They didn't grow up, being, Nazis or anything like that. And so I remember one of my co-defendants telling me, he's like, man, Ron, I'm not gonna be able to listen to my music, because he loved that East Coast rap. He grew up on it, Wu-Tang and all that. So he was just like, man, I'm not gonna be able to, listen to my music, man. And he felt like shit over that. But when I ran into him later on out in the streets, I asked him if he was able to. He said, yeah, I just listened to it anyway. I didn't give a fuck, and I believe him, But it's just one of those things where your own people, if you're black, white, Mexican, your own people are going to be on you about certain things, whether you're talking to someone from another race, or you're the type of person that, dates outside of your race, or even maybe, just listens to a certain type of music. Especially in California prison, you're going to get judged for that shit. They're going to really wonder where your loyalty lies. So I ended up having a situation myself while I was locked up in prison, and it was in High Desert, and it was when I first got to Sea Yard in High Desert. So when I got there, I had...
Before it goes any further, he's 100% right. If you're listening to too much rap, they'll be like, what's up with you, man? Or if they see you talking to another race, why are you talking to that dude? It was just, it was extremism on every level. And I don't ever think that they can completely integrate the federal prison system like they are or attempting to do in California, because you just got too many people who do not care if the sun doesn't rise in the morning. So how do you threaten somebody who has 3 life sentences, or life without parole, or 50 years, or whatever, and they know they're never going to see the streets again? And it's very expensive to run ADX Florence. That costs millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars a year to run a extremely secure facility like that. In fact, they had something called the SMU, Special Management Unit. It was in Lewisburg. They shut that one down. I think they turned that into an FCI now. It was a USP, turned into the SMU program, where it's basically like being in the hole with a few extra privileges, but not too many. And then they moved it from there to Thompson, Illinois. And then they just ended up shutting it down completely due to violence and probably the cost of the maintaining it. I would imagine that's why they sent me to FCI Miami, because when they shut the SMU down, now they don't have cells to send people out to, confinement cells. So they've made a housing unit, and every USP is like a quasi special management unit. So it was probably just a cell space thing, and I had a year and a day, which you do 10 months on, and I already had about 4 months in when I got sentenced to it. So I had about 6 more months to do in prison. They terminated my probation, so I probably looked at me as a relatively low-risk prisoner, which I was at that time. I was just trying to do my little bit of time and get back to the streets. But when I came into the federal system from the New York State prison system, and New York State is not a soft system, not at all, and I don't ever want to convey that. You definitely get hurt real bad in that system. But it's just a system, even though you have gangs and all that stuff in there, but even amongst them, I would say it's more a system where it's like prisoners against the police, prisoners against the system. Where in the feds, it's nothing like that. It's prisoner against prisoner, and whatever race you fall into, it's going to be your own race against you more than it's going to be another race against you, even though that element exists too in the feds. Well, let's get back to what his brother's got to say.
Got a visit from my wife. So when you get a visit, they call your name over a PA system. So they call your first and last name and all that shit. And so when I went to the visit and I came back, when I got back, somebody was in their window yelling out to me like, "Hey, what's up, Ron?" One of the homies I grew up with in the neighborhood, we're like family. You know, he's black and Filipino. His mom and my mom, you know, had plenty of dinners together, man, where we would all come over and all those kids would just hang out and spend the night. And we grew up with each other, you know, we're like family. So it happened to be him that was there in High Desert. So, you know, as soon as we come out to the yard, you know, I'm already over there, me and giving him a big old hug, and we're spending laps talking with one another on the yard. But, you know, I was fresh. I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know the politics and shit like that. He actually had to tell me, "Hey, Ron, I think, you know, you need to go holler at your folks because they might be tripping." Because I just went straight over there and just started hanging out with you know, my boy, you know what I mean? And so I did end up talking to my folks, and I could tell they was tripping. And matter of fact, they even came and hollered at me, you know, and wanted to know exactly where my heart was at. And I remember getting upset about that and wanting to fight over that. But, you know, because to me, I felt like it doesn't matter if I'm talking to somebody from another race or anything like that. To me, my heart is always going to be, you know, with my Usos. But, you know.
And that is a wild element. I mean, like, if you're white and the other white dudes see you talking to a black or a brown person for any amount of time over like a minute or two for like whatever little deal you need to do, they're going to start tripping on you. Like, what is this guy thinking about, you know, set tripping, or what's going on with him? Like, and it could become a big issue. Something as minor as that, something that happens every day in the free world. These politics are going to be completely alien to you if you've never been in a situation like that. And if you ever find yourself in a situation like that, it's like, wow, man, where am I at? And I think it's a result of that why extremists are bred in prison systems all around the country. Yeah, that's kind of my take on it, and I'm co-signing what this guy is saying for sure.
At the same time, you know, don't try to regulate me on, you know, who the fuck I can talk to, especially when it's like family, you know. And that was hard for me to really just get over. And it actually took my boy to tell me straight up, like, "Hey, Ron, I don't want you to get caught up in nothing." He's all, "Don't trip, you know, do your thing, and I will try to get my card, you know, changed over to other," because he came in as black. So I was just like, cool, cool. You know, I was happy that he was going to try to do that. But honestly, he was just pretty much lying to me. He just didn't want me to get in trouble.
And that's another important note. When you come into any prison system, but definitely the feds, they're going to ask you straight up, what's your race? They're going to mark it down on a card. And they're going to ask you, what's your religion? So if you're white and you want to be in good standing with the other white dudes, you better say, I'm white and I'm pagan. Why? All right? Because they have a big fire pit, a big odinous fire pit, and all the white dudes go out there every week and make a big fire and sit around and shoot the breeze. And if you're not out there amongst them doing that every week or in the yard working out with them, automatically you become suspect. Who's this guy? What's he's all about, man? Let's do a deep dive. You know what I mean? Is he walking gay or anything? Because that's another thing. If on an active United States penitentiary yard, if you're white or Mexican and they find out you're gay, you're out of there. It's just you're not going to make it on that yard. I didn't make these politics up. I don't even agree with them. Well, a lot of them I do not agree with, and that happens to be one of them. And the reason for that is you can't allow a white gay guy to come to the yard and fall in love or start having relations with another white guy or anybody. The thinking is it makes the whole race look weak, and it just won't be tolerated. If you're a gay person watching this, you probably didn't know that. Now, if you go to a low or a camp, you'll be fine. The FCIs are like 50-50. Some of them are rock and rolling and they push USP politics, and some are more lenient and laid back. It really just depends on what kind of facility you land in. But if you land on an active United States penitentiary yard and you're white or Mexican, I use the word Mexican to just identify an ethnic group, you're not going to be allowed to walk on that yard. As soon as they find out you're gay or if you look like a girl or anything like that, you're out of there. Administration might not even let you go to the yard, but if they do let you go to the yard, you're not going to be out there very long. And this is just something that the public should know, and I don't think they'd agree with it if they understood what was really going on in there.
We ended up eventually splitting up on the yard. He went somewhere else, but things like that is hard to deal with, especially when you got people from another race or whatever that you got nothing but love for, especially, in my situation, that was like a family member to me. So it's fucked up how they get down with that shit. And I wish that people in there would realize that, basically it's just one of the tools to keep us all locked up. And not only that they're physically locking you up, now they're controlling the way your mental is in there and mentally putting chains on you. And so, it's just fucked up that we fall for the okie doke. Of course, there's always going to be differences amongst people, cultures, backgrounds, things like that. But if you just realize, especially when you're incarcerated, if you just realize that we're all locked up and ain't going nowhere, it's obvious that we're all.
Yeah, and I agree with him in large part with everything he's saying. And another side note to this, SHU Outdoors and the channel itself, I'm going to keep bringing you this kind of content because I think it's important that the public really understands what kind of monsters are being created in these federal penitentiaries. I don't agree with what they do in there, and a lot of prisoners become a product of their environment. Do they have some responsibility for the acts they commit? Yes, absolutely. But when you're around an environment that caters to extremism, racial segregation, you either have to become a product of that environment or you may not survive. And I just don't think the public really understands. And I think things have gotten so out of control in the Federal Bureau of Prisons at the penitentiary level, they couldn't integrate it as far as like putting blacks and whites in the cells together, even if they wanted to. it would become a bloodbath. I mean, it would be a major issue. The blacks wouldn't tolerate it. The whites wouldn't tolerate it. The Mexicans wouldn't tolerate it. The others wouldn't tolerate it. I just don't think they could do it. I don't think they could really do it. I don't think they have the means or the will, for that matter, to do it. You know, and this guy here, I just came across this guy, 30 to Life, a couple of days ago, and he has a lot of videos out. And you definitely should go check his videos out. I found them to be very interesting and informative, confirming what I already knew. And on a closing note, you know, it's like there's a lot of creators that are out there, and sometimes I don't come across them till after they've been making videos for 2 or 3 years, or maybe even longer. So I realize with this channel, it's not going to be an immediate overnight success. It's something that I'm going to have to work at and build up, but I really feel confident that I'll be able to do it with your help. I see my little lava lamp went out over there. It's battery operated. I guess the batteries were dead. I didn't realize it when I started the video. I'll be more mindful in the future. But I'm going to keep bringing this hard-hitting content to you. Informative content that I just think the general public, the viewing public, should know. And I tell you what, the way you could really help me if you'd hit that subscribe button, like the videos, get them up and running, and get them out there. And I guess it really depends on what my viewing audience wants to see and the topics that I find interesting. It's kind of like a mesh between the two. Hit me up in the comments and let me know what kind of videos you'd like me to bring to you, what kind of topics you're interested in seeing, and I definitely take that under consideration and advisement. Also spent a whole lifetime in New York City, so I could tell you stories about Rikers Island, upstate New York, the federal prison system. Hit me up in the comments and let me know what you like, and your support, those thumbs up, those subscribing, hit that subscribe button. It really, really helped the channel get up and running. So until next time, I'm going to wish you well. Thanks for viewing. Stay up. Peace.